Welcome to the Data Loss Prevention Landscape and Overview module of the Symantec Data Loss Prevention 15.7 Planning, Implementation, and Administration course. Data loss prevention, or DLP, is quickly moving from being just a security concern to becoming a critical business mandate. Several factors are driving this shift, including increasing use of the cloud, the advent of Bring Your Own Device, or BYOD, into organizations, data proliferation, and privacy regulations. According to a Gartner report in 2016, data loss prevention and the enterprise DLP market are currently experiencing a renaissance through a second wave of adoption. The biggest driver of this is the breach activity that has engulfed organizations in nearly every sector of the global economy. This module will explore the business impacts, motivations, risk factors, regulations, and frameworks that shape the current data loss prevention landscape. DLP addresses risks that have long been known to information security professionals. These risks are focused on handling certain types of sensitive data, such as personally identifiable information, or PII, credit card holder data, financial and legal information, as well as company intellectual property, or IP. This module will also cover Symantec's approach to managing that risk based on the maturity and best practices of hundreds of customers globally. In this module, we will cover the following topics: the data loss prevention landscape, as well as data loss risk management. In addition, we will introduce the Symantec Data Loss Prevention Suite and go over the Symantec Data Loss Prevention architecture. Data loss prevention landscape. More and more frequently in recent years, news headlines have announced some new massive data breach, and organizations across the board have been affected, including government agencies, healthcare companies, retailers, and many other service providers, as well as millions of individuals. According to Verizon's 2018 Data Breach Investigations Report, there were over 2,200 confirmed data breaches in 2017, up from 1,200 breaches in 2016. The type of data that is exposed in such breaches ranges from personally identifiable information, or PII, to credit card holder data, financial and legal information, and company intellectual property, or IP. This topic will describe the factors that shape the current DLP landscape, focusing on the business impact, types of data affected, and common sources of DLP threats. The unauthorized exposure of data represents a critical risk to organizations. There are immediate impacts, for example fees stipulated by laws, as well as long-term consequences, such as brand reputation, that can carry irreversible damage. The Ponemon Institute, a private research center dedicated to privacy and data protection, has published yearly reports about the cost of data breaches. According to their latest study in 2018, the average cost for each lost or stolen record with sensitive and confidential information is $148, up from $141 the previous year. In general, this type of research focuses on PII, given that a cost model can be derived from the number of individuals whose information is exposed. Quantifying other types of information, such as intellectual property, is substantially more challenging. The financial impact is often the immediate and ultimate consequence of a data breach. There are several sources of financial impact, such as fines, credit monitoring and repairing, audits, litigation costs, settlements, and infrastructure, to name a few. Data loss can also affect organizational productivity. It's not uncommon that organizations will need to implement emergency measures to control damage after a data breach. These measures can affect current legitimate business processes, leading to productivity issues while the triage controls are in place. Data loss can also have a significant impact on competitive advantage. Organizations dedicate important resources to developing their IP, through which they can offer innovative products and services that help them achieve their goals. An IP data breach, especially when the culprit is a competitor or a foreign state, can translate directly into a dramatically decreased competitive advantage. In addition, data loss will also affect organizational reputation. More than ever, customers have serious expectations of privacy and data protection while they are shopping, receiving services, or attending to healthcare needs. Several companies have experienced customer attrition due to the loss of trust after a data breach. Lastly, although it is not considered a typical business impact, data breaches that affect critical infrastructure systems and facilities can potentially have serious consequences for a nation and its citizens. While each organization has its own priorities for handling data, the data types identified as at risk and protected by regulations fall into several categories. It is possible and accepted that the same information may fall into several categories according to the context in which it is used. The more common types of data at risk are personally identifiable information, or PII, intellectual property, IP, financial information, healthcare information, and a variety of other forms of confidential information. There are several definitions of personally identifiable information, or PII, but in general this term refers to any piece of data that can potentially identify a specific person directly or indirectly. Examples of PII, commonly referenced in public and private regulations, are full name, date of birth, national ID numbers, gender, religion, and even political affiliation. Almost every organization has to manage PII for employees, partners, customers, and other stakeholders. These entities are called data subjects in European Union legislation and PII principals in North America and other regions. PII is a legal entity more than a technical one. Organizations should always ensure that they apply the proper due diligence and care when dealing with PII. Intellectual property, or IP, refers to assets or works that are derived from human creativity and intellect. Examples are source code, trade secrets, product designs, unique processes, drawings, manufacturing plans, price lists, rates, and tables. As is the case with PII, IP is generally protected by laws. Organizations also need to protect strategic financial information, such as financial statements and scorecards that contain information vital for financial planning and forecasting decisions. Other tactical or operational information, such as account and routing numbers, loan contracts, employee payroll documents, and insurance details, also need to be protected. The healthcare sector is one of the most interesting fields in relation to data privacy and protection because it encompasses the integration of highly regulated industries. Healthcare organizations need to protect PII, IP, and financial information while conforming to many healthcare-focused regulations and mandates. Finally, there is also information that does not necessarily belong to a formal classification, such as confidential memos and documents, merger and acquisition documents, marketing plans, and organizational charts, all of which will need to be protected. It's important to identify some of the most common data loss threats to confidential data within an organization, and it is also important to identify the different challenges that each threat poses to organizations. The first category is well-meaning insiders. In general, loyal employees leverage the information and resources they need to legitimately perform their jobs, but a combination of broken business processes, lack of training and awareness, or an absence of proper risk control procedures can be the source of serious data leakages. It is not uncommon for a well-meaning insider to cut corners to make things more efficient, or to do something careless, putting sensitive data at risk in the process. In a study conducted by the Wall Street Journal Custom Studios in 2015, corporate executives who were surveyed admitted to intentionally or unintentionally engaging in behaviors that placed corporate data at significant risk of security breach. Those behaviors included the following activities. 53% admitted to uploading and storing company documents on a USB stick. 51% said they emailed company documents from a personal email address. 44% uploaded company documents to file sharing sites so they could work from other devices or share with others. 38% said they shared company information and documents via social networking sites. 24% installed unauthorized software or accessed unauthorized cloud services on a corporate desktop or laptop, and 22% installed unauthorized software on corporate devices. A successful data loss prevention program must include an education and awareness component that trains users how to handle confidential data securely. Although well-meaning insiders still represent the majority of data loss risk, there are, unfortunately, employees who are motivated by the desire for personal gain or who bear a grudge and are willing to take advantage of their trusted position within their organization. McKinsey & Company in 2018 made a study of the Veris Community Database, which contains records of about 7,800 publicly reported breaches from 2012 to 2017. Of the 7,300 records they examined, they found that about 19% of the breaches were traceable to individuals within the organization who acted with malicious intent. In terms of driving factors, it was found that 15% of these breaches were motivated by financial stress, 13% by willful recklessness, 6% by nosiness or inquisitiveness, and 3% by attention-seeking. In Verizon's 2018 Data Breach Investigation Report, 73% of the 2,200 confirmed data breaches in 2017 had malicious outsiders as the main perpetrators. and in more than 60% of the breaches, they compromised organizations within minutes. Malicious outsiders, such as competitors, hackers, and criminals, are typically the masterminds behind the majority of the massive data breaches. These are the actors we frequently hear about in the news. People in organizations who are motivated to steal information for profit for their organization or for personal gain. They gain entry to an organization and look for easy targets, such as valuable information left in unprotected locations by well-meaning insiders. It is crucial to identify the local, regional, international, or industrial regulations that mandate the data protection practices for every organization. There are several countries that have mature data protection laws, but an unprecedented number of new regulations have been approved in the last decade worldwide. More importantly, those regulations are being enhanced with additional instrumentation, where technology plays a definitive role for enforceability and compliance. The European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is designed to standardize data privacy legislation and provide a single common regulation across all EU member states, as well as Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Norway, which together constitute the European Economic Area, or EEA. The regulation was formally approved on May 25, 2016, and became law across all EEA states on May 25, 2018. The GDPR applies to any organization collecting or processing personal data pertaining to residents of the EEA, whether or not that organization is based in the EEA. The California Consumer Privacy Act, or CCPA, went into effect January 1, 2020, and is very similar in spirit and intent to the GDPR, including severe financial penalties for breaches and noncompliance. To address the complexity of information protection, a number of best practices, compilations, and standards have been published. The Information Systems Audit and Control Association, or ISACA, presented an excellent compilation of frameworks that executives are using to manage their data privacy and information protection challenges. These frameworks include the ISO/IEC Code of Practice for Information Security Controls, the American Institute of CPAs and Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants Generally Accepted Privacy Principles, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, special publication for security and privacy controls for federal information systems and organizations, and the ISO/IEC Information Technology Security Techniques and Financial Services Privacy Impact Assessment. To summarize, this topic has covered the basics of the current data loss landscape. Data breaches affect organizations in many critical ways, including financial impact, diminished competitive advantage, and damage to brand reputation. PII, IP, and financial information are usually identified as the most common types of information at risk. Organizations can create and identify additional information assets that must be safeguarded from breaches. Well-meaning insiders are the most common threat to data loss. Malicious insiders are also a serious threat, given that they already have access to resources, and malicious outsiders are often the masterminds behind the majority of massive data breaches. In the last decade or so, data protection laws have proliferated worldwide, with examples including the European Union GDPR and California's CCPA. Data loss risk management. Symantec has compiled best practices for more than 150 Symantec data loss prevention deployments across a variety of environments and industry verticals into a general risk reduction approach. These best practices show how to create the right mix of people, processes, and technology, and how to apply that mix across 6 project phases to consistently achieve measurable risk reduction. The first step to long-term sustainable data protection is committing to an enterprise-wide DLP risk reduction program involving people, processes, and technology. When an organization decides to address this risk, they need a clearly defined plan for success, with specific steps, tasks, resources, and objectives to reach both their short-term and long-term goals. Symantec recommends a 6-step model to address data loss risk, composed of the following steps: planning, deployment, baseline, remediation, notification, and prevention. The first phase of the model is the planning phase, and the objective here is to establish the foundation for the long-term DLP program, including the following key tasks: assigning the right staff, targeting areas of highest risk, defining the incident response approach, establishing success metrics and milestones for the first 90 days, and developing employee outreach and communication plans. Customers who incorporate these key elements at the very beginning of their DLP initiatives develop a comprehensive organization-wide DLP program that can result in rapid achievement of their risk reduction goals. All of the requirements gathered in the planning phase are then leveraged in the deployment phase. The deployment phase focuses on setting up the infrastructure, configuring the initial policies, reporting, and establishing an initial incident response workflow to allow for the project team's day-to-day system operations. Having a solid understanding of the business requirements and deciding which products will be deployed first will help you plan and execute effectively. The key tasks in this phase include determining integration with existing business processes, confirming hardware sizing and deployment topology, validating integration with the current infrastructure, and deploying a solution and optimizing performance. The focus of the baseline phase is gathering data, understanding where the organization's risk is, and tuning policies and procedures in preparation for taking action in the following stages. Symantec recommends staying in the baseline phase for 2 to 4 weeks for each policy that is deployed. That length of time typically provides enough data for an organization to make sure that policies are accurate and achieve a high-level understanding of where their risk is greatest, as well as confirm that their approach to incident remediation will work, as well as set some risk reduction goals. Some organizations stay in the baseline phase longer, up to 6 months. The benefit of staying in the baseline phase longer is that it is possible to detect processes that may occur only on a quarterly, semi-annual, or annual basis, with the obvious downside is that risk levels will remain steady in the interim. Some of the key baseline tasks in this phase include establishing meeting schedules, tuning policies and procedures, organizing incidents to understand risk drivers, and beginning to track metrics. The focus of the remediation phase is changing the high-risk business processes identified in the baseline phase and further developing the remediation plan for all incidents. The involvement of business unit representatives is critical during this phase to identify and modify these business processes to make them more secure, but without negatively impacting normal business workflow. In addition, a fully functioning incident response team is essential to effectively moving through this phase. The work done in the baseline phase of tuning policies and procedures and understanding and organizing incidents should have helped solidify and focus the team's efforts. The response planning completed in this phase is the basis for the violation notifications key to the next phase. The key steps of the remediation phase include working with business unit representatives to fix broken business processes, building an efficient incident response practice, and monitoring and communicating metrics. The focus of the notification phase is to notify employees of corporate policy violations to prompt behavioral change. This means, for instance, sending automated email notifications to give employees an immediate notice of policy violations, or automated pop-up messages notifying them of the violation and giving them the opportunity to justify their action. For organizations who have opted not to disclose their DLP initiative to employees, this means identifying the oversight areas and developing education and awareness programs targeted to the groups that pose the greatest risk. Symantec recommends that the organizations be transparent and open with their employees about their DLP program initiative. This open communication involves employees in the program and encourages proactive risk reduction across the organization. The key steps in this phase include alerting employees, configuring testing and enabling notifications, and monitoring and communicating metrics. Customers frequently see a dramatic reduction in incidents after notifications are enabled. All the work accomplished in the planning phase around employee communications helps make this the shortest of the phases as well. Preventing incidents, whether malicious or unintentional, is ultimately the end goal of any data loss prevention initiative. The prevention phase culminates in auto-enforcement of security policies, including blocking network communications, file transfers, and file copying, as well as quarantining network communications and exposed files, encrypting email communications, and initiating forensic investigations. The key steps in this phase include configuring and testing prevention and protection, alerting employees, enabling prevention and protection practices, and monitoring and communicating metrics. In summary, the Symantec Data Loss Risk Reduction Program proposes a comprehensive business-oriented program to achieve greater risk reduction, faster, and with fewer resources. The Symantec Data Loss Risk Reduction process has 6 phases: planning, deployment, baseline, remediation, notification, and prevention. the Symantec Data Loss Prevention Suite. In this topic, we'll discuss the function and features of all the products within the Symantec Data Loss Prevention Suite. Symantec has been talking with customers about their data loss prevention needs for many years, and customers tell us that they need to protect confidential data across a variety of vectors. For starters, they need coverage at the network level to prevent confidential data leaving via email, web, FTP, or instant messaging. On the storage side, customers know that confidential data sitting exposed on their repositories can be just a couple of clicks away from potentially leaving their network. Therefore, they want to cover storage as well by scanning file servers, Exchange, SharePoint, and other repositories to locate and secure confidential data. Customers also need to prevent the transfer of confidential data from endpoint computers via copy to USB, copy to network shares, printing, faxing, and so on. Meanwhile, the cloud is a significant concern for most customers who want to prevent the loss of confidential data via cloud email and cloud storage. Finally, customers want to cover all of these potential data loss vectors with Write Once, Deploy Anywhere policies that apply to all products in their data loss prevention product line. In response to customer requirements, Symantec has built a data loss prevention suite over the years that now includes all of the products and components shown in this figure. Symantec Data Loss Prevention, or DLP, covers all the main threat vectors for confidential data: storage, endpoint, network, and cloud. DLP helps customers prevent their confidential data from leaving their network and cloud infrastructure unauthorized. On the storage side, customers need to identify confidential data exposed in file shares, databases, and other repositories, and if necessary, protect that data, for instance by quarantining it. Symantec's data loss prevention for storage offerings include Network Discover, which enables you to locate exposed confidential data on a wide variety of repositories, and Network Protect, which lets you take action on discovered confidential files, such as quarantining these files and leaving a marker file in the original location so users will know what happened to the original file and how they may regain access if they are authorized to do so. At the endpoint, customers want to locate and protect confidential data stored on endpoint laptops and desktops. Endpoint Discover lets them do this. The companion product, Endpoint Prevent, covers user actions on the endpoint, such as copying to USB or CD or DVD, as well as faxing and printing and so on. DLP's network solutions provide a layered defense. They cover transmissions from unmanaged endpoints on which you cannot run a Symantec DLP agent, which may include contractor laptops, legacy Windows operating systems, FTP servers, and so on. DLP includes 3 network offerings. Network Monitor lets you passively monitor TCP traffic leaving your network, whereas Network Prevent for email integrates with one or more SMTP-compliant MTAs to monitor and block outbound emails. Network Prevent for web integrates with supported web proxies to monitor and block outbound web transmissions. As organizations move more of their business into the cloud, Symantec helps them protect their data with several products. The first of these, Cloud Service for Email, lets you monitor and block emails sent from Microsoft Office 365 and Google G Suite Gmail accounts. Cloud Prevent for Microsoft Office 365 Exchange provides another option for monitoring and preventing the transmission of confidential data from users' Office 365 email accounts. Cloud Detection Service analyzes data sent by supported third-party cloud services, such as Symantec CloudSock, a Cloud Access Security Broker or CASB application. Finally, Cloud Storage Discover lets you scan Box Enterprise accounts for confidential data. The Enforce platform, shown at the bottom of the diagram, provides centralized administration, management, policy authoring, and reporting for the Symantec DLP suite. The diagram shown here represents Symantec DLP's multi-tiered architecture, showing the components of the suite. The Enforce platform and associated Oracle database are depicted on the left. As mentioned earlier, Enforce provides the administration and reporting features for the entire product suite. In the center, you can see the individual detection servers for the various products. These are the components that actually analyze content, such as emails or web posts, and detect data loss incidents. At the right of the diagram, you can see the network components that the various detection servers integrate with, such as various content repositories to scan, supported third-party cloud applications through REST APIs, and endpoint computers or web proxies. When you write a policy in the Enforce administration console, it can be deployed to any or all detection servers and used to analyze input content, whether that content is network traffic, files and shares or repositories, or files or communications on endpoint computers. When a detection server captures an incident, it sends the incident to the Enforce platform, where it is available for reporting and remediation. Typically, a Symantec DLP deployment has one Enforce platform and any number of separate detection servers. Network Discover identifies confidential data exposed or residing on file servers, databases, collaboration platforms, websites, desktops, laptops, and other data repositories. Network Protect can then automatically quarantine exposed confidential files residing on file servers or SharePoint servers to a secure location. Both Network Discover and Network Protect are enabled by a single detection server type, the Discover server. In this figure, the Discover server mounts a remote file system, reads the files it contains, and inspects them for violations. Using the Network Protect functionality, it then copies or quarantines confidential files found in the scan. DLP's Cloud Storage Discover uses an on-premise Network Discover Cloud Storage Discover server to scan the contents of corporate cloud storage accounts. The current product version supports scanning of enterprise box cloud storage accounts, which are widely used in many organizations. Cloud Storage Discover lets you see what confidential information is stored in your employees' accounts, the people with whom your employees share that information, and how that information is shared, for instance, whether confidential files are password protected, or if they are accessible through links that are available to unauthorized users. The product also lets you quarantine confidential files or add configurable visual tags, indicating internal use only, for instance, to confidential files. The quarantine response supports secure relocation of files to an account inbox itself or to an on-premise location. DLP's Cloud Detection Service uses a cloud detector, a Symantec-hosted cloud-based detection server, to analyze data presented to it by supported third-party cloud services. It can detect incidents in the presented content and return recommended response actions to the initiating cloud services. The cloud detector acts as a REST endpoint that receives and responds to JSON requests from REST clients. Cloud Detection Service is currently certified to integrate with Symantec CloudSock, a cloud access security broker, as well as Symantec Blue Coat Web Security Services, or WSS, a cloud-based web proxy service. The integration with CloudSock is especially robust in that Cloud Detection Service can tell CloudSock to block or take other actions on confidential data in motion upon upload to supported cloud applications, or to delete or take other actions on confidential data at rest residing in supported cloud applications. The figure shown here shows end users or applications transmitting, creating, or interacting with data in SaaS applications or on websites. The integrated service monitors these actions and sends details to the Cloud Detection Service Cloud Detector for analysis. Endpoint Prevent monitors and blocks confidential data from leaving endpoint computers. It can also present an on-screen pop-up notification to inform users of policy violations. Endpoint Prevent is powered by one or more endpoint servers and by compact, stable agents that contain data loss policies and perform local detection. This figure depicts an endpoint server along with endpoint agents that are monitoring activity on endpoint computers. If a user attempts to transfer confidential data against policy, the agent executes the appropriate response, which may be to block the transfer, prompt the user to confirm the action, display an on-screen notification, or execute custom responses, such as modifying access control lists on files to remove guest access to selected files, for instance. The agent continues to provide protection even if the endpoint computer is not connected to the network, and it writes incident data encrypted to disk regardless of whether or not there is a connection. When the endpoint is able to connect to the endpoint server, it sends the incident data up to the endpoint server, which then forwards the incident data to the Enforce server. Endpoint Discover scans endpoints for stored confidential data, and, on Windows endpoint computers, can quarantine such files. Endpoint Discover relies on the same endpoint servers and compact agents that were used for Endpoint Prevent, as shown in this figure. Similar to Network Discover, Endpoint Discover requires the administrator to configure a scan target, which in this case governs the scanning of up to thousands of endpoint computers. In the target, administrators can select applicable policies and can configure various scan filters including directory filters, file size filters, or file modification date filters. Even if the endpoint computer is not connected to the corporate network or to the internet at all, the agent continues to run the scan, storing incidents in the agent's encrypted data store. When the agent is able to connect to the endpoint server, it sends the incidents up. When Endpoint Discover detects confidential files on Windows endpoint computers, it can quarantine them or apply customized automatic responses built on the Flex Response API. For Mac endpoint computers, Endpoint Discover will simply log an incident. Network Monitor passively monitors outbound TCP traffic to detect the transfer of confidential data from an organization's network. Network Monitor does not perform blocking, but customers can use the Network Prevent products, which are described later, to block supported protocols. Network Monitor is useful for getting a quick and continuous view of data loss risk over network protocols, and it can also complement the Network Prevent products by providing additional visibility into risky network activity. For Network Monitor, the customer typically sets up either a switch port analyzer or SPAN, or a network tap to direct a copy of network traffic to the Network Monitor server. In practice, when an end user sends a transmission over a configured protocol, the SPAN or tap will send a copy of the traffic to the Network Monitor server for analysis, while the original transmission continues uninterrupted to its destination. The Network Monitor server will send any incident up to the Enforce platform, where they are written in the Oracle database and populated in the reporting UI. Network Prevent for email lets customers monitor and prevent the transfer of confidential data leaving the corporate network via email. In addition to the blocking response, Network Prevent for email can trigger downstream quarantine or enforce downstream encryption of outbound emails that contain confidential data. As shown in this figure, end users will send email, which goes through an email server to a mail transfer agent or MTA. The MTA initiates a transaction with the Network Prevent for email server and sends the email over for inspection. The Network Prevent server then analyzes the email while keeping the original MTA-initiated transaction open. If the email triggers any policies, Network Prevent captures the incidents and sends them to the Enforce platform. The Network Prevent for email server also executes any Network Prevent for email responses. For a blocking response, Network Prevent blocks the email and returns a 550 response, permanent delivery error, to the MTA through the original MTA-initiated transaction. For a modification response, Network Prevent adds the email headers you specify, then returns the email to the MTA over a second ESMTP transaction, closing the original transaction. The MTA then reroutes the email based on the new headers. For instance, the customer's response rule could add headers that cause the MTA to send the email to an encryption gateway. This figure depicts an architecture in which the Network Prevent for email server is operating in reflecting mode, which means it returns inspected emails to the same MTA for which it received them. It is also possible to run it in forwarding mode, in which the Network Prevent for email server forwards inspected emails to a downstream MTA, different from the upstream MTA from which it received the emails originally. Network Prevent for Web lets customers monitor and prevent the transfer of confidential data via web transmissions. The Network Prevent for Web server integrates with an HTTP, HTTPS, or FTP proxy server using the ICAP or SICAP protocol for inline active web transaction management. If it detects confidential data in web content, it can remove the sensitive content or block the transaction entirely. This figure represents an end user sending a web transmission, for instance a web request, out to the internet via a corporate web proxy. Using the ICAP or SICAP protocol, the proxy forwards the request to the Network Prevent for Web server for inspection. If a transmission triggers a Symantec DLP policy, the Network Prevent for Web server captures an incident and forwards it to the Enforce platform for reporting. The Network Prevent for Web server then sends the proxy an ICAP response that reflects the response rule in the triggered policy. If your policies contain no Network Prevent for Web responses, the ICAP response tells the proxy to let the transaction go through. Otherwise, the ICAP response tells the proxy to block the request or remove the sensitive content and return only the sanitized request to the proxy. Network Prevent for Web can also process an organization's outgoing as well as incoming transactions. For outgoing HTTP or HTTPS requests, such as web emails or blog posts, for instance, Network Prevent for Web can monitor, block, or perform content removal on these requests. It can also monitor or block FTP requests. Cloud Service for Email inspects Software as a Service or SaaS email coming from Microsoft Office 365 Exchange Online and Google G Suite Gmail. It can also inspect email from on-premise Microsoft Exchange servers at customer sites for organizations that have not yet migrated or are not currently planning to migrate to cloud email services. If Cloud Service for Email detects content that violates DLP policies, it can block, modify, or redirect email as specified in the policy. In summary, Symantec offers two data loss prevention products for storage. Network Discover scans content repositories for confidential files, and Network Protect takes protective action on those files, for instance, quarantining them. For protection on the endpoint, Symantec DLP offers Endpoint Prevent, which monitors and blocks confidential data from leaving endpoint computers, as well as Endpoint Discover, which scans endpoint computers to locate and optionally quarantine confidential files. For network protection, Symantec DLP offers Network Monitor, which passively monitors a copy of outbound network traffic, and can be combined with Network Prevent for Email, which monitors and prevents confidential data from leaving over SMTP, or Network Prevent for Web, which monitors and prevents confidential data from leaving over HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP. For cloud environments, Data Loss Prevention provides Cloud Storage Discover, which scans cloud storage accounts for confidential files and provides optional quarantine functionality. The Cloud Detection Service analyzes data sent by supported third-party cloud services, such as Symantec's CloudSock, and Cloud Service for Email protects cloud-based email. Symantec Data Loss Prevention Architecture. In this topic, we'll discuss system requirements and other typical architectural details of the Symantec Data Loss Prevention suite. This topic builds on the product descriptions of the previous topic by going into some more detail on the inner workings of Symantec DLP. We'll briefly describe some sample performance statistics, sample system requirements, virtualization options, and other architectural details. This figure reviews once again the Symantec DLP architecture diagram, which shows the Enforce server, the Oracle database, the various detection server types, along with the network components with which the detection servers integrate. When planning your Symantec DLP architecture, it is often helpful to have some sample performance statistics for the various components. Note that the following statistics shown in this figure are general examples only, and that actual performance and production will vary based on hardware, network topology, traffic and file filters, your DLP policies, and other factors. Nevertheless, the sample performance statistics shown here can be helpful during the planning stage of your implementation. This figure shows the sample minimum system requirements for the Enforce server and the various detection servers. These requirements are tailored to large organizations, defined as having more than 10,000 employees, and having more than 40 megabits per second of network traffic, which require robust policies for detection. Note that these are minimum requirements, and that your organization may require more resources than indicated here. This figure shows the sample requirements for the Symantec DLP Endpoint Agent, required for the Endpoint Prevent and Endpoint Discover products. For up-to-date and complete details on system requirements for product components and associated third-party products, please reference the Symantec Data Loss Prevention System Requirements and Compatibility Guide. Symantec supports running Symantec DLP servers on VMware and Windows Hyper-V virtualization products, provided the virtualization environment is running a supported operating system. At a minimum, customers must ensure that each virtual server environment matches the system requirements for servers described in the Symantec Data Loss Prevention System Requirements and Compatibility Guide. A variety of factors will influence virtual machine performance, including the number of CPUs, the amount of dedicated RAM, and the resource reservations for CPU cycles and RAM. The virtualization overhead and guest operating system overhead can lead to performance degradation in throughput for large datasets, compared to a system running on physical hardware. Customers should test virtualized components of Symantec DLP and use their own test results as a basis for sizing deployments to virtual machines. Symantec DLP also offers appliances for some detection server types. Virtual appliances are available for the REST API detection server, the equivalent of the Cloud Detection Server detector, which receives content for detection analysis through a REST API, as well as for Network Prevent for Web and Network Prevent for email detection servers. There is also a hardware appliance available for the Network Prevent for Web detection server. These appliances are all optional for a Symantec DLP implementation because Network Prevent servers can be installed on an organization's own hardware or virtual machines, while the REST API detection server can be deployed as a Symantec-managed Cloud Detection Service cloud detector. Symantec DLP has many fault tolerance features built in. For instance, when an endpoint agent is not connected to the endpoint server, it continues to detect violations and notify and block according to your policies, while storing incidents in a local encrypted data store. When the agent reconnects, it pushes incidents up to the endpoint server, which forwards them to Enforce and into the Oracle database. Similarly, if for any reason there is a temporary loss of communication between a detection server, for instance an endpoint server or network monitor server, and Enforce, the detection server retains incidents until the connection is restored and then pushes the incidents up to Enforce. Most organizations build on Symantec DLP's inherent fault tolerance features by implementing redundancy at the server level. For detection servers such as Network Prevent for email servers and Network Prevent for web servers that are implemented inline and that analyze live traffic leaving the network, this can mean the implementation of high availability or HA architecture in which multiple detection servers are ready to handle detection requests from a bank of MTAs or web proxies. For detection servers such as Network Discover and Cloud Storage Discover that are not inline, customers may still decide to implement architectural redundancy to support the scanning of target repositories within organizational timelines. For instance, a customer may dedicate 2 Network Discover and Cloud Storage Discover servers to split the scanning of an especially large repository, with one server scanning one half of the directories, while the other server scans the other half. In summary, it is important to review system requirements and detection server sample performance statistics when planning your DLP architecture. Symantec DLP supports VMware and Hyper-V virtualization products for most DLP component servers. Virtual appliances are optionally available for the REST API detection servers, such as Cloud Detection Service Cloud Detectors, and the Network Prevent for email and Network Prevent for web detection servers. There are several options for Symantec DLP server redundancy for the purposes of disaster recovery, high availability, or capacity planning. In summary, this module has explained how several factors, such as increasing use of the cloud, bring your own device, data proliferation, and global privacy regulations, have transformed data loss prevention into a business mandate. This shift is driven in part by the notoriety that data loss breaches bring to organizations in several critical ways: financial, decreased productivity and competitive advantages, and damage to brand reputation, and even to national security. Additionally, we covered the topic of data loss risk management and explained how DLP addresses risks that have long been known to information security professionals. These risks are often focused on handling certain types of sensitive data, such as personally identifiable information, or PII, intellectual property, or IP, financial and healthcare information, and other forms of data specific to an organization. Risk of data loss is driven mainly by 3 common threats: well-meaning insiders, malicious insiders, and malicious outsiders. Symantec's suggested approach to managing data loss risk is to embrace a DLP risk reduction program, which can be best implemented through a 6-step process: planning, deployment, baseline, remediation, notification, and prevention. In addition, we introduced the Symantec Data Loss Prevention product suite, which protects your organization's confidential data. The suite consists of the following products: Network Discover, which scans content repositories for confidential files; Network Protect, which takes protective action on files discovered in content repositories, such as quarantining; Endpoint Prevent, which monitors and blocks confidential data from leaving endpoint computers; Endpoint Discover, which scans endpoint computers to locate and optionally quarantine confidential files; Network Monitor, which passively monitors a copy of outbound network traffic; and Network Prevent for email, which can monitor and prevent confidential data from leaving over SMTP. Network Prevent for web can also monitor and prevent confidential data from leaving over HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP. Cloud Service for email, which protects cloud-based email; Cloud Storage Discover, which scans cloud storage accounts for confidential files, which it can optionally quarantine; and Cloud Detection Service, which analyzes data sent by supported third-party cloud services, such as Symantec's CloudSock. A full implementation of the Symantec DLP suite usually consists of a central Enforce server for policy authoring, server administration, and incident reporting, an Oracle database, several detection servers, and endpoint agents. When planning a Symantec DLP implementation, review the system requirements and detection server sample performance statistics carefully. It is also important to consider the options for server redundancy, including high availability and capacity planning. Thank you for joining us. This concludes the Data Loss Prevention Landscape and Overview module of the Symantec Data Loss Prevention 15.7 Planning, Implementation, and Administration course.